Angela Rayner, the Labour deputy leader, is being accused of being a tax avoider. While these attacks are coming predominantly from the right, they've been mounting in recent weeks, and now Labour is having to confront the allegations. So what could this mean for the deputy leader? Is Labour in trouble? Or is this a Tory smear campaign? So, Freddie, just to contextualise this story first came from Red Queen, a new biography of Rayner by Michael Ashcroft, who is a former deputy chair of the Conservative Party, big party donor. He's also someone who's been subject himself to tax-related controversy. He was a non-dom domiciled in Belize and was under pressure when he was in the House of Lords over that status. So set the scene for us. What's he saying that he's found out about Rayner's tax affairs?
So it's essentially a question about capital gains tax and whether she paid the right amount of it. This goes back to before she was an MP, when she had a house that she owned and then she sold and she didn't pay capital gains on it. The question is whether she should have. And that question arises because at the time she was living with her husband at another address, and you can only have one primary residence on which you don't pay capital gains. So the question is, did when her husband sold his house, did he pay capital gains on that, or were there a sufficient amount of home improvements so she got a tax exemption on her original house? So that there are questions around at the moment, and this has been going on for quite a long time now. We've seen the newspaper, the press, run with it quite hard. The Tory party run with it quite hard, and I think there's lots of reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll go into, but it's not gone yet. It's not as if Angela Rayner sat down and done a big interview and said, okay, this is the reason why I didn't pay capital gains on it. She's essentially said, I've taken legal advice and tax advice, both of which say I've done nothing wrong, so I'm not going to apologise. She's been very clear that she's not going to release her tax returns unless the Tory politicians who are sort of going after her do so as well. Mm-hmm. So she's sort of standing her ground. There's been reasonable support, I would say, from Keir Starmer, from Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves was on the media round yesterday, and she came out in support of Rayner. Starmer's made similar comments.
She is confident that she's paid the right amount of tax, and I have the utmost faith and trust in my friend and colleague Angela Rayner.
Angela's given her answers many times over. She's taken legal advice on it that has satisfied her team and my team. I'm confident in the answers that she's given.
At the moment, there's not that much internal dissent, but there's clearly a little bit of momentum around the story. So we'll see where it goes.
And Greater Manchester Police, which originally concluded that no wrongdoing occurred, has actually reassessed that decision to probe her electoral registration, where she was voting from.
Yeah, so this is a question about whether she was registered to vote from the right address. You should register to vote from your primary address, and if she wasn't living there at the time, then that means it wasn't her primary address. So there's two questions. You got the electoral one and you got the tax one. So Greater Manchester Police have said they're going to review their decision. This comes after a Tory MP, James Daly, asked them to do so. It makes sense for the Tories to press this case. They've had such an awful few months. I think we should go into that. The Tory attack machine has been flaccid. It has been non-existent. It's been absent from the debate for months. People in Labour know this. People talk about it. Where are they? Where are their sort of big stories on Labour politicians? How are they going to shift the narrative back onto Labour? And I think this is the first bit of news or bit of good news that they've had for a long time, and that's why they're focused on it so much. Though it didn't even come from them, it came from Michael Ashcroft and his researchers. But I think that's why they're going for it, and that's why they'll be pushing the newspapers to run with it for so long. There are some in Labour as well who will point back to some parallels in the past. I think it's interesting that they pursued a similar tactic with Keir Starmer during Beergate.
Remember Beergate? It definitely is reminiscent of that, isn't it?
Yeah, so this was also during the local election campaign.
Yeah.
Right now, we were about 3 weeks away from the local elections. So back in 2022, this story re-emerged that had already been released, but it re-emerged during the local election campaign that Keir Starmer may have potentially broken lockdown rules when he had that famous beer, I don't know, it was Peroni or something, with a curry in Durham.
Peroni.
Always a Peroni with Keir Starmer. And they ran with this for a long time. And remember Keir Starmer sort of placed his whole career on it. He did that press conference where he said, if I am find if there is a fixed penalty notice, I will resign, which was a huge moment. So it was a very successful operation from the Tories in shifting the narrative in the local election campaign onto Keir Starmer and away from Partygate. But it's not on the same plane at all, this, but it's a similar tactic, and some in Labour have noticed that parallel.
I do think that it really does echo that, in the sense that now when you hear people complain about Partygate, which is still something that angers voters a lot, they will often say, well, I suppose Labour were no better, or, well, I suppose they were at it too. So there is a sort of, all politicians are the same element to these kind of stories. So even if, Keir Starmer didn't end up having to resign, he wasn't fined, it may be that it turns out that there was no wrongdoing on Angela Rayner's part in this story. I mean, we can only speculate at the moment, but no matter sort of what the outcome, if there's a bit of a whiff of something dodgy going on in voters' minds, they think, oh yes, well, the Tories have had their own sleaze stories, and now Labour's got their own one too, and that kind of thing hangs around. It sort of hangs in the air. It sticks. Yeah,
it's impressionistic, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's probably why it's quite clever of CCHQ to sort of grab hold of it and push it for all it's worth, even if the sums involved, I think it's something like £1,000 to £3,000 would have been owed if anything's owed at all, are trifling compared to a case of Nadeem Zahawi, for example, whose tax affairs we spoke about on the podcast at the time. It still has that sort of they're all at it actually kind of element to it.
Oh yeah, it won't help in any way public trust in politicians, because who's going to go into the depths of capital gains tax law and whether she was right or whether she was wrong or whatever it might be. The impression is everyone's really bad. Oh, I thought Labour might be a little bit better. Angela Rayner is the one who's been going after the Tories on fraud, on lacking probity in public life, these sorts of things.
Dominic Raab's bullying, Nadeem Zahawi at the time, the non-dom status of Rishi Sunak's wife. I mean, she was the one who was used as the attack dog on these kind of sleaze stories.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not going to help that in any way. But I guess the question is, how does it end? How do Labour draw a line under it? Because we know that the Tories, as we've discussed, aren't going to let up. I think the key thing, and some in Labour I've been speaking to this week agree, is that police investigation, or that police review into their investigation. If they come out and say, look, we were right, we stick by our conclusions, she's done nothing wrong, I think that will probably draw a line under it. But the other question is, are HMRC eventually going to launch an investigation? That's what some Tories hope. I don't think there's any sign of them doing so yet. But if they do, again, that's another thread, a little bit of a momentum. And we know about these stories, it's not really about the content, it's about momentum, it's about perception, image, it's about trying to get some cut through. I don't think we've got there yet. I wrote a piece in Morning Call this week about what is a scandal, at what point does it become a scandal. A scandal, I think it requires the public outrage, which in itself requires the public to know about it, and I don't think we're, or to be aware of it and to think about it and to react to it, and I don't think we're there yet. It's nothing at all like Partygate, even Beergate, or some of the scandals we've had in recent years. So I mean, that's probably part of the reason that we've not spoken much about it yet. It's going to rumble on in the background, but I don't think it's going to distract too much from day-to-day politics.
And what do you make of this defence that you're hearing, not just from Labour politicians and Rayner herself, but also some commentators? So there were columns by respected commentators in The Times and The Independent who've described these attacks on Rayner as sort of a class war. So the basis of these arguments is that someone like Rayner hasn't had a straightforward family life. She grew up on a council estate, had an abusive father, mother who had bipolar. She was a single mum by 16. She has a blended family now, a child with special educational needs, and she's been trying to hold down a more complicated home life.
Yeah.
And that some of these attacks on, which house was she living in more, they were just a mile apart, these properties kind of, they sort of take advantage of the fact that she doesn't have the sort of standard nuclear family set up that maybe some of the politicians who are laying the allegations on the thickest might have. And what do you make of that kind of line?
I think on the ground, on sort of the basic level, the Tories are going to run with anything they can get their hands on. On the other level, there is a tone to some of the coverage and to some of the discussion that I think, it's just a little bit sneery. I think Angela Rayner does wind some Tories up in certain ways. Why is that? Well, I don't know. It's hard to peer inside the minds of, hundreds of people. But, you can see a theme, I think. It's hard to say definitively, but yeah, I mean, she's a northern woman that's not afraid to say what she thinks, and maybe that winds people up in the wrong way.
Yeah, and I remember when I think she was pictured at Glyndebourne, and they had a go at her for that, which was really, I think I wrote a piece at the time that argued that that's like a really unconservative thing to argue, because
same here, right? We've got the right to buy being exercised, and it's a story of someone,
it's a story of Thatcherite
up.
Aspiration.
Exactly, and I'm sure Tories would come out and support it, and if it is just tax avoidance, using the system to prop yourself up is absolutely fine. So yeah, maybe there is. I mean, it's really hard to say. I think you're right to say that there is actually a little bit of a pattern here. It's hard to put your finger on a single individual, but it's part of the tone of the coverage has certainly been focused on that.
And we've spoken about how it's slightly complicated for Labour because Rayner has been used as this attack dog figure for these kind of stories on the other side. But it also makes it difficult because Rachel Reeves was actually out this week trying to sell the alternative to because, they were going to use the scrapping of non-dom status to fund some of their commitments. They can't really use that anymore because Jeremy Hunt's stolen it from them. And so her new alternative for raising that revenue was cracking down on tax evasion.
When's it not?
Yeah, a very familiar pledge. She suggested it could raise £5 billion a year. But of course, when she's going out and trying to sell this, she's being asked about potential tax avoidance on her own benches. So it does make media rounds slightly more complicated for...
Yeah, definitely. That's why it does need to end.
Yeah.
It's not yet a scandal as we discussed, but it does matter for Labour. It is tarnishing some of their other coverage. It was awful timing for Labour that they tried to announce this tax policy at the same time they got questions about Rayner's tax. They'll say obviously that they're completely separate things, but as soon as you've got two stories with the words tax in, journalists are going to link the two, and you're going to get questions about them. So yeah, they need to draw a line under it, and I think many people in Labour will be thinking how they do so. And as I said, it's the police report, and then some others have suggested a big sit-down interview where the full details are exposed or explained, might help move the story on.
Yeah. And of course, one last complication is that she is in an elected role as deputy leader. So it's less straightforward. If Starmer wanted to draw a line under it and get rid of her, politically very difficult and unlikely. It's even more difficult because she's an elected sort of figure in the party rather than someone he can just... I mean, he couldn't even sack her in the reshuffle when he tried to. No,
not at all. So no, I don't think that's a possibility. But even if he tried, as you say, Anoosh, even if he said, Angela, I'm going to take 7 out of 8 of your jobs, or however many it is, she's still going to have that deputy leadership because she was elected by the membership. So that gives her an independent power base within the party, and we've seen her use that to great effect in the past.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on this story anyway. And the tax expert Dan Needle is actually analysing what we know so far for us, and so we will put that piece in the show notes. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.